Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Ketubot. We are up to Perek Daled Mishnah Alayev. Today's Mishnah should be Le'ilun Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Alayev, Eliyahu ben Burcha Israel ben Chana bad Miriam Menuchatam began Eden Amen, and Le'avdir ben Chaim Lechaim v'Refuah Shenemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa Betoch Shah Cholei Israel. We learned earlier in chapter 3 Mishnah 4 that one who violates or seduces a virgin Nahara must pay a fine of 50 shkalim as well as damages for a shame, reduction in value, and in the case of violation or pain. This Mishnah teaches who is entitled to receive these payments. Nahara shenitpateta, if a virgin Nahara was seduced, boshta, uvgamah, uknasah shel avia. The payments for her shame, her reduction in value, and her fine go to her father, ba'atzar, batfusa, and the same is true regarding the payment for pain in the case of one who was violated. The Mishnah teaches the law where the Nahara's father was alive when the crime was committed, but died soon after. Amda badinat shlomet ha'av, if she had her case tried in court before the father died, meaning he was still alive when the court ordered the criminal to pay, harein shalav, the payments of the property of the father, met ha'av harein shalachin, therefore even if the father dies before he collects the payments, they go to her brothers who are his heirs. When the court obligated the criminal to pay the fine to the father, it became a debt that is owed to him. Generally, when someone who is owed a debt dies, the right to collect it is transferred to his heirs. It may be compared to his actual property that is inherited by his heirs upon his death. In Mishnah's case, therefore, when the father dies, his heirs, the brothers of the Nahara, gain the right to collect the payments. Lo ispika la'amod bedin ad shemet ha'av. However, if she did not have a chance to have her case tried in court before the father died, meaning he died before the court ordered the payments to be made, haren shalatzmah, they go to her. Since the father was not alive when the case was decided, he and therefore his heirs do not gain any right to the payments. Instead, they are paid to the Nahara herself. The fine is not owed to the father until the court orders the criminal to pay. Therefore, if the father died before that point, he never became entitled to it. Since he is not entitled to the fine and therefore neither are his heirs, it must be paid to the Nahara herself. Although the Torah says that the criminal must pay the father, that law applies only where the father was alive when the fine became obligatory. If he died earlier, the right to collect the fine belongs to the Nahara. Now, it is only the fine of 50 shkalim it is only the fine of 50 shkalim that does not become obligatory until the court makes its decision. The obligation to pay damages for shame, pain, etc. does not depend on the court. Rather, the criminal must pay the damages as soon as he committed the crime, even without a court's order. Nevertheless, we do not say that since the father was still alive at the time of the crime when the criminal became obligated, the father is entitled to the damages, because the Torah requires the damages to be treated in the same way as the fine. Therefore, since the fine is paid to the Nahara, in this case, the damages must also be paid to her. Now, the next ruling, which is similar to the previous one, is based on the principle that a Nahara leaves the jurisdiction of her father when she becomes a bogeret. Amda badinat shelo bagra, if she had her case tried in court before she became a bogeret, meaning the court ordered the criminal to pay when she was still a Nahara who was under her father's jurisdiction, haren shelav, they are the property of the father, met av hen shelachin, therefore even if the father dies before collecting the payments, they go to her brothers who are his heirs. Lo ispika lamod bedinat shebagra, however, if she did not have a chance to have her case tried in court before she became a bogeret, meaning she was already a bogeret when the court ordered the payments to be made, haren shelatzma, they go to her. Since she had left her father's jurisdiction by the time the case was decided, he has no right to the payments, rather they must be paid to her. Now, according to the previous Tana, the crucial time is when the court orders the payments to be made. Provided the father is alive and the girl is still a Nahara at that time, the payments become his property, and therefore if he dies before collecting them, they must be paid to his heirs. The next Tana has a different opinion. Rabbi Shimon says, Im lo ispika likbod ad shemet ha'av, haren shelatzma, if she did not have a chance to collect the payments on her father's behalf before the father died, or the father himself did not have a chance to collect them before he died, haren shelatzma, they go to her and not to the father's heirs. Rabbi Shimon holds that the crucial time is not when the court orders the payments, but when the payments are collected. So even if the father was alive at the time of the court's decision but died before receiving the payments, they never became his property, which would go to his heirs. When he dies, therefore, the right to collect the payments go not to the heirs, but to the Nahara. Normally, when someone who is owed a payment dies, the debtor must pay his heirs. Rabbi Shimon, however, derived from the Torah that the fine for violation or seduction is an exception to this rule. Even if the father was alive when the court ordered the criminal to pay, at which time it became a debt that is owed to him, and then he died, his heirs do not get any right to it. Only after he collects the fine and it becomes his actual property does it become transferable to his heirs upon his death. And the same law is applied to the payments for damages. And the dispute between the Tana Kama and Rabbi Shimon also applies in the Mishnah's case of a Nara who became Bogeret and thereby left her father's jurisdiction after the court ordered the criminal to pay, but before the fine was collected. The Tana Kama, who holds that the fine becomes the property of the father at the time of the court's order, rules that since she was still a Nara at that time, it goes to the father or his heirs. Rabbi Shimon, on the other hand, who holds that the fine is not his property until he collects it, would rule that since she became a Bogeret before the collection, it must be paid to her. And the Rav does tell us, then Rabbi Shimon, the halakha does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. The Mishnah now turns to other payments that are earned by a girl, so to speak. The law is that if a Ktana or Nara earns income or finds an object that someone had lost, in a case where it does not need to be returned to the owner, they become the property of her father. This will be in Mishnah 4. This Mishnah teaches when he becomes entitled to them. Ma'aseh yada umtziata af al pi shelo gavta. Her work and what she finds belong to her father even before she collects them on his behalf, or he collects them on his own behalf. Therefore, if the father dies before they are collected, they go to her brothers who are his heirs. If a young daughter, a Ktana or Nara, works for someone, her employer is obligated to pay her father. Should the father die before he collects the payment, his heirs acquired the right to collect it just as they acquired the right to collect any debt that was owed to the father at the time of his death. The payment for income is obviously not a fine which becomes obligatory only when the court orders it to be paid. It's just a regular debt which is payable to the father immediately. Everyone agrees, therefore, that even if the father dies before the case is tried, should the case be taken to court, or before he collects the payment, the right to collect is transferred to his sons. The Mishnah says that her income and her findings belong to the father even before they are collected. This statement makes sense with respect to income, since income needs to be collected, but it makes no sense with respect to her findings, because a finding is not collected from anyone. Before she picks up the lost article, she has no legal connection to it, and after she picks it up, it has already been collected. So the Gemara therefore interprets the Mishnah to mean that her income is like her findings, meaning they are the same in the following way. We know that what a Nara finds in her father's lifetime belongs to him, but what she finds after his death does not belong to his heirs. Rather, she may keep it for herself. Likewise, the income that a Nara earns in her father's lifetime belongs to him, but what she owns after his death belongs to her. And that is on Abotai of Mishnah Aleph. Now, like we stated in this Mishnah Aleph, income earned by a Ktana or Nara belongs to her father. This includes the Ketubot payment that is owed to a girl whose marriage ended with divorce or the husband's death. The Mishnah teaches in Mishnah Bet that there is a difference in this regard between a marriage that ended after Erusin and one that ended after Nisuin. Hamareset bito v'gersha. If one's daughter was betrothed, literally her father made her betrothed. The betrothal of a Ktana or Nara is affected by her father. She becomes a betrothed when, for example, her father accepts a betrothal object such as a ring from the groom. So if one's daughter was betrothed and she was divorced before Nisuin, and then she was betrothed the second time and she was widowed before Nisuin, all this having taken place when she was still a Ktana or Nara, Ketubata Shela, or Ketubah from each of the two marriages belongs, Ketubata Shelo, her Ketubah from each of the two marriages belongs to her father. There is a dispute whether a woman whose marriage ended during Erusin received the Ketubah. The Tana of our Mishnah maintains that she does. Although the Mishnah states that she was divorced and then widowed, the same law applies where she was widowed and then divorced, or divorced both times, or widowed both times. However, if she was fully married and divorced, and then she was fully married a second time and widowed, or she was widowed and then divorced, or divorced twice, or widowed twice, when she was still a Ktana or Nara, Ketubata Shela, her Ketubah from each of the two marriages is hers, because once a girl, even a Ktana, performs Nisuin, she leaves the jurisdiction of her father and he is no longer entitled to any of her income. Now this Tana said that where both of her marriages enter after Nisuin, both the Ketubah belong to the daughter. The next Tana disagrees regarding the first Ketubah. Rabbi Yehuda says Arishona Shel Av, the first Ketubah belongs to the father. Although it was not collectible until after Nisuin, it was written before Nisuin when she was still in her father's jurisdiction, and it is the time of the writing the Ketubah that counts. Now, the sages respond to Rabbi Yehuda Amrulo. They said to him, and la via reshutba. Once she became fully married, her father has no jurisdiction over her. According to the sages, it is not the time when the ketubah was written that counts, but the time when it becomes collectible. Therefore, since the first ketubah was not collectible until after Nisuin, by which time she had left her father's jurisdiction, he is not entitled to it. And the Rav does tell us that Racha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda, that Racha follows the opinion of the Chachamim. And that is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.